Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. It is definitely soup season, so today we're making hot and sour soup. To start this dish, I have 1 cup of dried shiitake mushroom, 1 cup of dried wood ear or cloud mushroom, and 1 cup of lily petals. Now I know this is an unusual ingredient, but it's used a lot in Asian cooking. You can find this in the Asian grocery store or online. Now all these ingredients need to be rehydrated, so I'm just pouring over enough hot water just to submerge them. We're going to set this aside and let these steep for about a half an hour. You could rehydrate this all in one large bowl. It's completely up to you, and it saves you on dishes. So while those are rehydrating, we need to break down 10 ounces of pork. I'm using thinly sliced pork shoulder, but you can use pork chops if you'd like. If you're vegetarian, you can just leave the pork out completely and substitute the chicken broth that we're going to use with vegetable broth. It's still going to be fantastic. So we need to cut our pork up into nice healthy strips. And this is actually easier if your pork is still slightly frozen. Once it's all chopped up, we're going to pop this in a bowl, separating any clumps, and we're going to add 2 tablespoons of water. We're going to stir this around and let the water absorb into our pork. Before we season with 1/2 teaspoon of kosher salt, 4 teaspoons of vegetable oil, and 2 teaspoons of cornstarch. We're going to mix this around till everything is well incorporated and set this aside until we're ready to use it. Now we need some heat for our hot and sour soup, so I have 6 dried chilies. So I'm simply just gonna break these in half. This is super simple. We also need 8 ounces of dried tofu skin. If you can't find dried tofu skin, you can just leave this out. This just adds a nice little texture. If you watch my Hokkien spring roll recipe that I did for Chinese New Year's last year, we utilized tofu skins then. Just break that up into small bits. We also need 8 ounces of fresh firm tofu. Now we're just going to chop up into 1-inch squares. So I'm just slicing this in 1-inch strips horizontally and then vertically, and then I'm going to take those little rectangles and cut those in half. Now this is fresh bamboo, not super fresh because this has already been prepped for me. You could use canned bamboo shoots, that's perfectly fine, but I've never worked with this before, so I was kind of excited. So we need about 10 ounces of bamboo shoots, so I just need about half of this large piece, but look how cool this looks inside. So we're just going to slice this up very thinly. And again, just use canned bamboo shoots if you can't find whole bamboo, or if you just want your life to be easier. This is actually very easy to break down because this has already been boiled and prepped. So once we have that all sliced up, we can pop that into a bowl. For the garnish, I'm just chopping up 3 scallions just into a nice thin disc. And I want to do this ahead of time because once we start making the soup, things are going to move pretty quickly. Once we have that all broken down, we can pop this in a bowl and set this aside until we're ready to garnish. Now moving on to our lily petals. This is that long string thing that you find in your hot and sour soup that you're not quite sure what it is. I honestly thought it was a different form of bamboo, but this is a lily petal. It adds a very subtle flavor. It's not like you're smelling a lily because that would be a little too perfumey, but it adds like this beautiful, slightly crunchy texture to your soup. So I'm just roughly chopping these in half. And setting those aside. Now my wood ear, these are also called black fungus mushrooms. This rehydrated and yielded much more than I needed. But that's the nice thing about cooking. When you make things at home, you can add as many or as little of ingredient as you want to suit your taste. So I'm just giving these a nice little rough choppy chop as well. And I am only going to use about 1 cup of this and then reserve the rest for a different dish. Maybe I'll scramble some eggs and add it to that, but just eyeballing this. Going to reserve 1 cup for our soup and store the rest of that. Now shiitakes add this beautiful meatiness, almost like a portobello. So again, if you're not using pork, this adds that meaty texture to your soup. Give that a nice little squeeze. The stems of shiitakes tend to be very woody and hard to chew, so I like to remove those, but reserve those for stock. But we don't want them in our hot and sour soup. And then we're just going to slice these up kind of in the same size as we sliced our pork. And after these are all sliced up and popped into a bowl, we can now move over to our stovetop. So over medium-high heat, I have 16 cups of chicken stock at a low boil. Substitute this for veggie stock if you're vegetarian. And we're going to add in all of our pork. Now, because of the cornstarch and because of the nature of protein, once we add this in, you're going to see a little scum rise to the top of your broth. And you want to skim that off because we want the broth to be as clear as possible. Now, this does make a lot of soup, so you can have this recipe if you'd like. We just love hot and sour soup so much in this house, and I knew my partner would eat every last bit, so I'm making a very large amount. So to remove the scum, just skim your spoon over the surface of your broth and just discard that. Now we need to season with 1 teaspoon of salt, a half teaspoon of sugar, our dried chilies, 2 teaspoons of sesame oil, 4 teaspoons of dark soy sauce, 2 tablespoons of light soy sauce, and that's just low sodium, and about 4 tablespoons of white pepper. That's going to add an additional type of heat to our soup. I am going to go back in and skim off a little bit more of that scum. We're going to let this cook for about 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, we can add in our lily petals, our wood ear mushrooms, our shiitake mushrooms, and our bamboo shoots. We're going to let this cook for an additional 5 minutes, just so everything can start absorbing all of that beautiful flavor that's in your broth. Now we can add in our tofu skins. Again, this is another texture that's going to be added to the soup. If you can't find tofu skins, just leave that out. We can add in our firm tofu. Give this a little stir. The fresh tofu is going to add the meatiness. The tofu skins are going to add almost chew. Now for the sour part of our soup, we need to add in 2/3 of a cup of white vinegar. And at this point, your soup should start smelling like that hot and sour soup that you're used to getting from your favorite Chinese takeaway. We're going to let this cook for an additional 2 minutes, just to soften up that tofu skin, before we add in a slurry of 1/4 cup of water to 1/3 cup of cornstarch. Just mix this very well. The cornstarch tends to settle to the bottom. And we're going to slowly start drizzling this in. Don't add this all in at once because you don't want a huge clump. Just drizzle in as you're stirring, and you just want to add enough to thicken your soup, enough to coat the back of your spoon. Now we also need 2 eggs that I'm beating with my chopsticks as well. And we're going to treat this the same way as we did the cornstarch slurry. We're going to slowly drizzle in, but move the soup around so that egg has a chance to incorporate throughout your soup and cook evenly. Once all your egg is added, we're going to let this cook for an additional 5 minutes, just to ensure that egg is thoroughly cooked through. Then we can taste for seasoning. Now to plate, I've just poured a healthy amount into my favorite bowl, and we're going to garnish with our beautifully chopped scallions. And now we can give this a taste. You get that slight heat from the chili peppers and the white pepper, the sourness from that vinegar. The textures in this soup are beyond. You get the softness yet firmness of that tofu, the chewiness of the tofu skin, the crunchiness of woodier mushrooms, that beautiful texture of the lily petals, the meatiness of the shiitakes. This is much more complex than you would think a simple soup is, but this is simply the best. But there it is, hot and sour soup. I really hope y'all try to make this. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, give it a like. If you loved it, subscribe and hit that notification bell because I put out new videos every Thursday. Thank you again, and until next time, happy cooking. Here's a very large piece of bamboo. All right, let's tackle it.